often had this question asked about how I met Les Paul, and it's a pretty interesting story. This will be in a book that I'm writing right now in collaboration with Max Shane, who is my co-author. And but this book is based on my life and music, and it goes on beyond that, starting from a young child. But essentially, how I met Les. Very interesting story. I was enthralled with Les Paul's sound, and of course, not knowing how it was done, I was very, how can I say, trying to figure this out. Generally speaking, you know, when you're a kid, your envisionment of things are so different. But here's what happened. I had a friend, Richard, who was a good friend of mine, who had a car and a license to drive the car. I was about 1959, mid-1959, and my father had found a friend of his who was a carpenter and told him where he was working, and it was at Les Paul's house. And he said, "I think your son would like to know where he has his home in Mahwah, New Jersey." And of course, my gosh, yeah, of course, that would be great. And so my father told me the address, and one weekend, Richard and I drove up to that area. We found Deer Haven Road, and there was a small gate that said no trespassing, so we couldn't go in there. But there was another road going up behind the area, which was actually about 200 feet above, right up against the Ramapo Mountains there. And so I said, well, let's go up there. I got my binoculars, and we'll see if we can find this house, because I think I know what it looks like. I don't know the back of the house, but if we see any car drive up behind one of these houses and somebody gets out with a guitar, that's got to be Les Paul's house. You have to remember, in 1959, there weren't that many guitar players. So really, it was in its infancy. And so after 2 weeks, finally, here it comes. There's a car, drives up, and I'm looking down off to the right, and I see somebody get out with a guitar. Oh my gosh, there's a guitar case. Hey, Rich, this is the house. I think I found it. And so here I am being a peeping Tom for 2 weeks trying to figure this out. And I think that I've nailed it now. So I said, let's go down there. And he says, what do you mean? You're going to go down to the house? He's no trespassing. I said, I know. I said, but he got through there. So I think nobody's really checking. There's no guard there. So let's go in there. So we go onto Deer Haven Road. We go, and I said, you know, I'll remember what the house looks like because of the Listerine commercials. The Listerine commercial always opened up with a picture of the house on it. So I finally said, hey, Rich, that's the house. I remember it. That's the front of it. This is it. Let's pull up that driveway. He says, you want to? I said, yeah, pull up on the driveway. So what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go knock on the door. Knock on the door. I said, yeah, I'm going to go knock on the door. So I go up the stairs, knock on the door, and no answer. And then finally I knock again. And finally somebody comes to the door, got a hammer in his hand, a ripped T-shirt, penny loafers on, and Wrangler jeans rolled up on the bottom. He says, can I help you? I said, yeah, I'm a friend of Les Paul's. And he said, really? So I said, well, he knows me. He says, he does? And I said, yeah, he knows me. He knows me. Well, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a guitar player, of course. He said, oh, so why would he know you? I said, well, I usually stop by when I'm, you know, traveling in the area doing on a tour or something like that. And he said, oh, well, what was your name again? I said, it's Tom Doyle. And he looked at me and he says, well, I'll tell him. Well, of course, that was Les Paul. I did not know it. And Les would always do that. I mean, he met Mary almost the same way, Mary Ford the same way. And he just is a practical joker. He doesn't want to let you know who he is, and he's incognito. You'd never know it was Les Paul, no matter if he was sitting in the room with us right now. He just is not that type of person. He wasn't ostentatious. Anyway, so this starts up, you know, I said, well, too bad he wasn't home. I told my friend, but maybe another time. But I never went back up there again. And about 5 years later, 1965, my mother and father get a phone call, and it's Les Paul on the phone. And he said, I'm going to come and see you kids play, your kids play. I was told all about your daughter and son, and I want to go see them play. And I got this thing, it was a telegram. See, the telegrams hardly have them today, but he said it was the Gettysburg Address. It was this long, and he said, this is some story about these kids. I want to come and see them. And unbeknownst to Susan and I, my sister, my mother and father did not tell us. He says, don't tell them I'm coming. And so we go play in this place called the Silver Fountain in Montvale, New Jersey. And we're playing, we get done with the song, Bye Bye Blues, bang, we get done with the song, and there's a guy sitting over the other end of the room, way back over, off to the right. And he comes walking over and he pulls out his hand and he says, hey, that was great. My name is, oh, I said, oh my God. It's Les Paul, the same guy I met at the door. So here was the meeting. And he says, you know, you kids are great. He says, you got to come up to the house. I'm inviting you up. I want you to come up tomorrow. Wow, he wants us to come up to the house. This is where all that stuff was created. We can't believe it. Now we're going to Les Paul's house. And that was the beginning. And from that point on, Les would befriend me, and I would befriend him, of course, and be up at his house to 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. We're discussing things, trying things out. He gives me his guitars to play on, see what I think of the sound, and all of this stuff goes on and on and on. Come to see us play every place we played. And he'd say, how are you getting that sound? I said, oh my God, I'm using you know, tweeters and woofers and horns. And he said, well, that sounds great. That rhythm sounds great. Your sister's using on that guitar. And you know, this is how it all grew. And about, I would say, another few years later, he said, can you, well, actually, not a few years later, but just about a year later, he said, Tom, I got some guitars I want you to work on because, you know, I'm thinking about playing again. I'm really retired. And he said, but I'm thinking about playing again. Do you think you could fix these guitars? And I said, sure, Les. And that's how it began.